posture is such a stiff word, right? You're sitting good posture, right? But posture is actually a very flexible thing. So then you have to like tell kids, okay, you have to move your fingers on the fingerboard, right? And so then they're doing something that feels totally weird again.
I had a great time connecting with today's guest. I met her in person about a year ago in Texas, and we talk about all sorts of things in this episode. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and Katie Eakes is the assistant principal bass for the Anchorage Symphony and the Anchorage Opera. She is also an educator in Alaska, plays in many other groups as well, and I pepper her with so many questions about what it was like growing up in Alaska, what it's like being a musician in Alaska, all that kind of stuff. This was a lot of fun. Katie has a wonderful Instagram. Definitely give her a follow. We've got that linked up too. And I had such a great time meeting her in person and talking with her for this episode. Quick shout out to our sponsors, Dorico, Ear Trumpet Labs, and Modacity. More on them later, but let's get into this conversation with Katie Eakes. My dad actually went to high school in Anchorage, and then he dropped out at 17 and joined the Navy. And one of those, but I've never been. I've heard of what Alaska's like in January. Is this the time of year when you have extremely little daylight? Have you got like a couple hours a day or something? Or
Yes. It's like 10 to 4 or so. And
okay.
we just went to Chena Hot Springs and lost an hour of daylight going north, and then an hour or 2 hours, like an hour like in the morning and an hour in the afternoon. So we lost 2 hours of daylight just driving north. Like,
wow,
this is dark.
Okay. But so is that as bad as it gets, as like 10 to 4 or maybe 10:30 to 3:30 or something? Is that like, how bad does it get?
Well, here in town, I mean, we're at the bottom of the state, but above the Arctic Circle, there's places that they don't see daylight for a while.
I was in St. Petersburg, Russia, in the opposite time of year, like June or something like that, and they have the White Nights Festival where it really, and that's so bizarre. It's the first time in my life I've ever experienced that, where it never really, like I was in my 20s, so we were out partying all night, and so it was like it never really got dark. Does that happen? I'm assuming that's maybe St. Petersburg is a little north of Anchorage, but is that a similar phenomenon in the summer?
Yeah, it's the land of the midnight sun here. The sun doesn't go down. It's still very bright at 11 o'clock at night. It can be, 1 a.m. at 4. You're like, wow, like I don't know what time it is.
Does that?
Yeah, it's nice.
Does the darkness mess with you this time of year? And I'm curious because like moving to San Francisco had a really big impact on my just sort of overall mood, because I was living in Chicago, which is not the cloudiest place in the world, but it's pretty cloudy, especially like in the winter. And do you get bummed out by the long periods of darkness or?
Right. Well, it all sets in during my busy time. The symphony season and the school year all sort of line up over top of each other, and it gets dark during that time. But I teach in multiple, not right now, but multiple buildings every day. So while somebody will go into an office building when it's dark and come out when it's dark, I get to go in and out of buildings still when it's daylight. So that's nice. But also I take a lot of vitamin D.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I taught for 7 years. I was a full-time public school teacher, and actually this time of year bothered me way less once I started teaching school, because that was like the busiest time of year for me. We were preparing for Allstate or whatever trip was coming up, and so I used to get really depressed in January. That I don't want to turn this into a therapy session for Jason, but I would get really depressed in January when I was a freelancer, because the work would all dry up and I was just sitting around and it was cold and miserable. And I was digging my car out. And then I was so busy in January, February, I barely even thought about the fact that it's dark out. So.
Yeah. Well, in January, I mean, you've got the post-Christmas slum, right? You've got people take down their decorations, and there's all those memes about how your house looks empty as soon as you do that, So being active about the post-Christmas, lights and all that stuff, and knowing that January is going to be kind of bleak, and then February, you've got Valentine's Day, which usually brings gigs or holidays or decorations, blah blah blah, all that stuff. So yeah, January can be kind of hard. You just have to sort of push through.
What does so I'm so ignorant about Alaska. Although I do know a fair bit about Fairbanks, believe it or not. One of my really good friends here in San Francisco, a great bass community organizer, is named Richard Duke, and he's from Fairbanks. Went to school at UC Santa Cruz, and then would go home to Fairbanks, and he would drive that route, there and back in this like old white pickup. And I just remember these stories of like days and days, on the road between. What people who are musicians in Anchorage, I'm guessing that none of the group. Well, actually, tell me, does the Symphony have any sort of constituent that's full time? Is there like a string quintet that's full time, or a woodwind quartet, or is everybody part time, or how does that work in the orchestras you're in?
It is. Yeah. Sorry for the
no
dogs.
worries. No worries. I have a little guy right there. He probably won't bark, but he might. So.
Okay.
No
Sorry.
worries.
Hopefully they'll stop soon.
That's okay. I get it.
Yeah. No. It's not a full time. It's not a full time job. We have. The Symphony has 5 major concerts, and then classic concerts, and then we do a lot of other things, chamber groups or pop concerts or, movie themes, those kinds of things. It's not full-time, though. There's a couple jobs with the Symphony, but not as a performing musician.
Then do the opera. So I'm guessing this is just me, because I come from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is smaller than Anchorage, but it's kind of like mid-sized, not much else nearby. Anchorage is more extreme than that, for sure. But so like, do the opera? I'm guessing a lot of people that play in the Symphony also play in the opera. Is that the case in terms of musicians, or is it?
Yes and no. It's okay. Not the two. The two we work. Not hand in hand, but side by side, maybe. So if you're in the Symphony, you're not necessarily in the opera. I believe they hire per concert. So okay. It's just a hire per concert. So, like I've been filling the role as principal bass player, but I'm not. And they hire me for that job. I'm also the only bass player.
I know that gig.
right. But it's a per show thing.
Okay.
For the opera, but not for Symphony.
And then do you guys perform in the same hall or are there separate halls for the opera and the Symphony, or do they share a performing venue? Yeah,
the building is beautiful. It's the Performing Arts Center, and it's a big building, and there's multiple halls in the one building. It's right in downtown Anchorage. Town Square is right there. And so the Symphony performs in the biggest one in the Atwood, and the opera performs in the Discovery, usually the fall performance and the spring performance. There's often like a January performance that's in the smallest theater, the smaller one, the Sidney Lawrence Theater. And that one is the reduced orchestra. Sometimes they need a bass player, sometimes they don't.
Okay. Wow. How long has that facility been around? Has that been around for decades, or is that a relatively new thing? Or
well, I remember it going up when I was a kid, but so 30-something years.
Okay. I'm just curious because we, Sioux Falls, and again, Sioux Falls and Anchorage have probably more different than in common, but like Sioux Falls didn't have any sort of facility like that when I was growing up, and then they built one in, I want to say 2000 or somewhere around there, and it had a huge impact on the community, and there was a lot of resistance in the community, like, why are we going to blow money on this thing? They actually took this historic old high school that I actually went to high school. It was actually really weird because it's like they totally gutted it. They only kept the exterior. There was this really cool brick building, like 1910 or something like that. And they built this wonderful hall. And so now touring orchestras have started to come to town. Broadway shows have started to come to town, all sorts of stuff. And it's really like spiffed up the community, I guess, maybe I want to say. So I always think it's interesting when those things happen. And so then, sorry, I have a million random questions about this life in Alaska. I promise not to pepper you with too many. many. But so what are musicians? Is there like a freelance scene outside of the opera and the symphony? Are there other orchestras? Like because I know you run into the ocean or the mountains pretty quick. Is there like are there other orchestras to play in? Like here in San Francisco, people are driving an hour out of town. They're going up to Santa Rosa. They're going down to Monterey, San Jose. You're probably in Anchorage, and then you're like driving into the wilderness, I'm guessing. How does that work?
Yeah, there's the Anchorage Civic Orchestra, which is different than the symphony, and it's. I guess if you were to have a competitive soccer team and a non-competitive, the Civic is non-competitive, right? So that's another option. There's, what's it called? Simply Strings, maybe. There's an adult group for adults new to strings, or I think if you're going to play like a second instrument, not primary instrument, that's available in Anchorage. But then if you drive south, there's Girdwood's about a half an hour and lots of gigs out there. I actually got to see Lucas Nelson out there, which was amazing.
Wow.
I know, right? But there's not any standing group there. But then you drive about 3 hours further, and in Kenai, the Kenai Peninsula, there's a music community. I don't know how much they play together. I believe they do stuff in the summer because there's a conductor down there. One of my girlfriends, she's a violist, she's come to play in the Anchorage Symphony from Kenai, multiple shows, opera also. So there's something down in the Kenai Peninsula for sure. And then if you go north, because the mountains are east and the ocean's west. So you go north and then you get to the Wasilla area, Wasilla Palmer, where Sarah's from.
Okay.
And, right. and there's no orchestra offered in the schools, but there is the band program. And actually the only marching band program offered in the state of Alaska, I think, I might be wrong, but I think is in Palmer. Yeah, it's out in that area, which is amazing. But there's not a standing orchestra out there. We do have community bands. There's like Anchorage Community Band, I think an Eagle River Community Band. But Eagle River is the city in between. It's about half hour north, very military populated. And then there's a Wasilla Community Band. And then I think after that, you got to go all the way to Fairbanks.
Okay. And Fairbanks isn't close. Keeping track of what you practice is so critical. And my practice companion, Modacity, it does it for me. It's so awesome. Here's Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on how this works.
Accounting before the spreadsheet was manually handwritten ledgers, and that's where most musicians have been for the last 200 years. And it's time to automate that and save some time and let people focus on what's really important, which is performing on their instrument.
And that is exactly what Modacity has done for me. I feel so much more focused and energized and enthusiastic about practicing. I love this app so much. You can learn more at modacity.co and visit our website for a special offer for lifetime access for this app. Such a cool piece of technology. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. This episode is brought to you by Ear Trumpet Labs. They make hand-built mics out of Portland, Oregon, and they have an excellent mic for upright bass called Nadine. The Nadine is a condenser mic with a clear, natural sound and incredible feedback rejection. This mic is a completely new design. The head mounts in between the strings above the tailpiece with a rubber grommet, and the body securely straps to the tailpiece with Velcro elastic. A 14-inch Mogami cable connects the two parts, making it easy to place on any bass. It's durable and holds up to the demanding needs of the instrument while offering excellent sound quality. Ear Trumpet Labs is offering a free t-shirt just for Contrabass Conversations listeners with the purchase of a mic. Just visit www.eartrumpetlabs.com/contrabass to claim yours and check out the Nadine. And then I've seen photos of Fairbanks about this time of year, and they look truly terrifying to me, just in terms of like the level of snow and cold. And I know it was always a little bit depressing to me to realize that Anchorage tends to be nicer this time of year than Chicago, where I lived for years and years. You'd look up the weather. I mean, it's not like it's like you're not out in a bathing suit probably this time of year, but it's still like I'd be like, oh great, for the next week the high is 4 degrees Fahrenheit, in Chicago. So how about in this? And I promise I'll I'll come to an end of my Alaska questions, but how about in the summer? Are there performing festivals? Like I used to play in some summer festivals, like up in Wisconsin, chamber music festival, and I was the bass player. Is there a scene like that around Alaska or Anchorage, the Kenai Peninsula, or okay?
Yeah, just a little bit actually, and even in southeast Alaska, Sitka, there's the Sitka Arts Festival. Oh, what is his name? There's a cellist. His first name starts with a Z, and he's got long hair. He is very he's in Sitka a lot. God, I gotta remember what his name is. That one's a big one. There's the UAF Festival, University of Fairbanks, and that's 2 weeks long, and that's how I landed in college and a bunch of stuff, And then there is stuff in Anchorage too. There's oh my gosh, her name is Christine. She is actually in San Francisco. She's a violinist from here. Her parents are from here, and she runs a festival for kids here, and she makes it as cheap as possible, and brings in people like Paul Sharp to come and teach these kids, and who may or may not be able to afford anything. And, they come in with ASD instruments, basses, and whatever. But she runs a festival, and I've attended that one. And then there's Sitka, that one, UAF, and then there's Birchwood. That one's for kids. Mm-hmm. I know the kid ones. that one's for kids, and I've taught that one. That one's really, really great. Also, they offer 3 levels. Kids get to go actually camp in a cabin, like with wood bunks, but it's not like it's actually just decent, and there's a lake. And they have a good time.
Wow. Okay, that's very cool. I can't. One of these days, I'll go and visit. I've been saying that for years, but I got to actually make it happen. It's fun. It's funny. I was thinking. I think you might be the 4th Alaskan bassist I've had on the podcast. I'm going to see if I had Paul Sharp on back in the day, like the dark ages of the podcast. I was a great chat, but I just think of like production quality and stuff. I'm sure was pretty rough. And then Jack Unziker, who I believe is from Juneau, Alaska. He teaches at UT Arlington now, and then Richard Duke, and is there somebody? Well, and you, and I think that might be it. But I have Alaska on the mind a lot of the time because here in my neighborhood in San Francisco, there is an Alaskan bar. Of all things, it's this place called Specs, and it is covered with the people that owned it originally were from Alaska, I think, and they have this tradition of people all over the world visiting and sending postcards to Specs. So when you go in the bar, not that we can do that at the moment, but when you normally can, you can pull out these boxes of postcards and you can rifle through all these memories people have shared, pull out postcards from 1964 and people it's really cool. And then there's just all this Alaskan paraphernalia, I guess is the word, all over the place. Everybody in there, I think nobody's under 60 in that place, and except me. And and Richard, my friend from Fairbanks, highly approves of this place. So he gets the Alaska seal of approval. So
that's fantastic.
So, Katie, whenever you get to San Francisco, I don't know if you visited here in the past, but whenever you do, I got to take you to. I'll take you to other places too, but I got to at least take you to Specs to see if you approve.
Yeah, I can't believe I haven't heard of it. That's awesome.
Well, a lot of people haven't heard of it. Actually, the farmers market here. It's like the only thing we can do right now during the pandemic is go to the farmers market, and so I've gotten to know one of our local brewery people that's at the farmers market one of the reps at least, and we were talking, and he's from Anchorage, and I said, and so I told him my dad grew up in Anchorage, and then I said, have you checked out the Alaskan bar? And he had never heard of it either, and he lives here, and it's 4 blocks from the farmers market. So so anyway, we'll go, Katie, we'll go to the farmers market, and then we'll check out Specs.
That's perfect.
You're originally from Alaska, right?
Born and raised.
Okay. Where, what time? Are you from Anchorage or elsewhere?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Wow. So what's music like in the schools there? Did you start, what instrument did you start on? Were you playing throughout public school years? And how'd you get into this?
My family, my dad, my grandma, they're musicians. And so they were in town, and my dad started me on piano when I was 3, but I can't play. I mean, I can twinkle, with a little Alberti bass or whatever.
Right.
I can do that. But I started playing bass in 6th grade at the beginning of the 6th grade program in the school district. My dad played bass, and I stuck through the school district program actually. And it's really kind of what gave me identity and carried me through school and everything. So it really, the Anchorage School District music program really actually it worked for me, and now I'm back and working in it. So,
did you? Correct me if I'm wrong, but at some point at least you went to study with Paul Sharp, right? Was that was that your undergrad, or when did you do that? It was
I graduated, and then I went to Texas Tech to study with him. And sometimes it takes people a little bit longer to grow up, so it took me 6 years.
Nothing wrong with that.
But it was good. Yeah, I studied with him for 6 years, and then I came home.
Okay. What was it like had you spent time in Texas before that point, or what was it like moving from Anchorage? I always think it's interesting moving from, because our country is so vast, like Anchorage and Texas. I mean, we are talking about two totally different parts of the world, really, even though they happen to be in the same country. Well, was it a good time? Did you enjoy the heat, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I love Texas. I love Alaska. I love Texas. Mm-hmm. Lubbock, I think, is about 200,000. It's about 100,000 smaller than Anchorage. Mm-hmm. So the city size was pretty comfortable, which was nice. It was flat. Just flat as a pancake. But, there's beauty in everything. So when you find the sun rising, like, at the ground level, that's a lot different than when it rises behind mountains. So it was still beautiful. And there's a lot that I like about Texas for sure. There was some cultural things that were an adjustment. Being so far from my family was really hard. Mm-hmm. But Paul's from Alaska, and poor Paul. I was 17 when I went to college, so my mom had him sign a permission to treat form.
Okay.
So I was like, I kind of looked to him for a lot of things, initially, and he's such a nice person, and he did his best. He's like, well, here, he emailed me some of the other bass players' names, and so one of the bass players in town was from Lubbock. And he was going to Tech to study with Paul, same age, and his family was there, and they just took me in really fast. So that community was just really warm and accepting, and Lubbock is small and Lubbock is flat. It's in the desert, and I still love Texas. So
I love Texas too. This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the advanced music notation software from Steinberg. And one of the features that perplexed me at first, and then I realized its brilliance, is their concept of flows. Here is Daniel Spreadbury, Senior Product Manager, on what flows are and how they work.
The ability to have multiple exercises or multiple songs or whatever, it's so obvious because music is very rarely just one through composed bit from start to end, whether it's a show or a symphony or a sonata or a songbook or whatever. Music's in sections. That's just how it works.
That is how it works, but that's not how most music notation software works. And the ability to break things up like that, oh my goodness. When I'm creating exercises or anything of the sort for my students or any sort of project that I have going, that makes organization so much easier. Exporting is a breeze. Everything that you do in Dorico is beautiful from the get-go, which is really cool coming from other pieces of software. Check them out at Dorico.com. That'll take you to their site on Steinberg's website. And they have a free product called Dorico SE where you can do practically everything that you can in the full version of Dorico for up to 2 parts. That's more than enough if you're doing bass duets or anything of the like. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Dorico. People have been saying such great things about my course with Discover Double Bass Beginner's Classical Bass. Here is Nicholas Walker, professor of double bass at Ithaca College and past president of the International Society of Bassists. Nicholas writes, Jason draws from this vast network with his contagious enthusiasm and love of learning. Presented through the beautifully organized and easily accessible framework of Discover Double Bass, this is a terrific learning experience for any beginner, as well as a great model for any new teacher. I am blushing, Nicholas. Thank you so much. I'm just so thrilled with how this course came out. Jeff Chalmers and the whole team at Discover Double Bass are so professional. It was such a great experience, and it was the best representation of what I would love to take every single beginner through in terms of format and presentation. And I'm just so happy that it's out there. You can learn more. We've got a link in the show notes, or you can just visit discoverdouble.com/JasonHeath. Everybody I've met is cool. The bass community is great. I love going to TMEA, their music conference, and just my wife is from Austin. She grew up in New Mexico, but she's from Austin. So we had a fun trip a couple years ago, going to San Antonio and then going down to Austin. And yeah, I got to get back soon. I would have been back were it not for the pandemic this past year, but yeah. Me and everybody else.
I know so many plans have to be put on hold or change or whatever, and I'm hoping that, all those tickets that people had to buy or refund or whatever, like my sisters got tickets there in Seattle. Mm-hmm. They got tickets to go see opera and lots of things that they're just on hold, So I hope that when we can go back, that things are still able to be put on, those shows can be put on,
Yeah, the thing I'm cleaning to is like looking at other pandemics in history. If we look at 19, about 3 or 4 years down the road, it's bacchanalian frenzy of people going to concerts and having a good time because they've been through this sort of misery. And if you look in prior pandemics, not that I've done that much research, but so those that can survive the next little bit, I think we'll have my hope is that we'll have a good flourishing. But if we pretend we're not in a pandemic, Katie, and we think about like rewind to like last year or a couple years ago, you have what seems to me like a really thriving kind of portfolio career where you're doing all these different things, and you're probably doing a lot of things that a lot of people that listen to the show can relate to. Can you maybe just go through what you're doing in a typical year with the teaching and the ensembles, and like what does a typical season look like for you?
Sure. So usually we have, I'm in the symphony and the opera. So, and I say yes to everything for those two groups. There's the chamber. I should have mentioned this earlier, like the chamber choirs that hire, ensembles occasionally. But I start my school year and I teach at 3 different schools, and I teach I teach 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. And last year I had about 170 students in my 3 different schools. Wow. It's a handful, right? And a middle school. And I love them so much. Mm-hmm. And then I work about 100 nights a year playing symphony and opera shows, maybe an occasional show that's not related to the two, something like Little Mermaid or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I stay pretty busy during the school year with those things. Last January and March, I was just dying because there was nonstop work, and other people were commenting on how much, like, the symphony had all those small concerts. We had a bunch of those in January, and it was just constant. But it was good. Work is good. So that's what I do.
Well, I have a good friend. I have a lot of middle school teacher friends, and until the pandemic, I was going into my local middle school here and doing bass sectionals, and I've done that sort of thing for years. I taught high school when I was teaching full time, and I was always terrified of the thought of teaching middle school orchestra. I think I can see like absolutely loving the students, and it's one of those things. I've talked to several teachers about it, including my friend Peter Tambroni from back in Chicago. He specifically chose to teach middle school because you don't have nearly as many of those late nights, and it frees you up so you can perform. And for him, it was like the perfect job because they were old enough to like you could really dig into some concepts and do some cool music. That a lot of people reflect back at that age and remember it as a miserable time. I certainly did not enjoy it was junior high for me. But I think as an adult, teaching those kids, that can be, it's an interesting period of growth, especially 6th, 7th, and 8th, right? I mean, I'm sure you thought a lot about that. But then it seems like a great kind of balance to me that one can strike if you want to play a lot too. Because the job, I think, stays at work. Not that, I mean, teachers work so many hours, but I think it tends to stay at work a little more than maybe some some of these high school jobs where you're planning trips and you got late night everything. So, did you did you plan on teaching middle school? Like when you were coming back to Alaska, was teaching had you been planning on doing that all along?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Teaching was always a thing. Always. Teaching middle school, not so much, but I think I don't know if I wanted what grade I wanted to teach. Actually, the question that really stuck through my mind, it's kind of funny, with my boss, not the superintendent, but the director of fine arts. Mm-hmm. He was also my professor of music education at Texas Tech.
Wow. Really? Whoa. That's crazy. Yeah. What a small world.
Yeah. Well, in 2001, the string projects were popping up at the universities. I think there was 22 of them. And I started that program with Tech when it started in January 2001. Then Dr. Wood came in the next fall, and I did 5 years with that program before I ever started teaching. And the question that always stuck out more to me, more than the grade actually, was if you were to take over a strong program, or a program with a strong director, mm-hmm. or a weak program that you have to build up, what would you prefer? And those are hard things to fill. Those are hard shoes to fill. And I've taught fourth grade all the way through high school, through 12th grade. I've had a private student who got into Tech with Paul. Mm-hmm. So those kinds of things. And I don't know if I ever thought more about middle school, but more I think about building programs and helping kids find an identity in music, because I know I needed it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. It is really that thinking about what kind of program you will be taking over is such an interesting question. So, there's a band director back in Chicago named Brian Wiss. I believe I got this from him. I might be not remembering this right, but he had a 4-quadrant system, and he said, look, there are 4 different types of programs you can take over. You can take over from the program's good and the director's well-liked. That's an easy one if you can fill those big shoes, right? You take over a program from somebody who is not good and not well liked. That is more challenging in a way, because people might not be so into orchestra or whatever, but you're probably going to be an improvement no matter what. And then not well liked, but the program's good. I don't know about that one, but the toughest one is not good, but they like the director. So they don't play well, but there was like an affinity for the director, and that's like the most impossible situation. And so it was really interesting to me reflecting on that, as I think I moved through 3 jobs while I was. I did move through 3 jobs as I was teaching, and they were all in that they were good. The program was good and they were well liked. So I had that challenge of trying to live up to expectations. But it's really interesting to me, and it's interesting how different. I just am amazed that I was certified to teach 4th grade technically and high school differently, but I feel like I did not have the skill set to walk into a middle school and teach. It's just hilarious that on paper I did, but the job, it's just amazing to me how different that word teacher, that role, it encompasses such a vast. I mean, I think I was technically certified to teach elementary choir, or elementary. I don't even know what I would do. I feel like I could, I wouldn't do any better than any random person off the street. So it's really interesting how wide that field is and how different those jobs can be.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think I'm K-12 certified. Mm-hmm. And I know now, this is year 15, I think, mm-hmm. 16. 15. I think I know now that if I were to go teach high school, that I need to spend a lot more time on violin, mm-hmm. That's, just straight up. And, my second year of teaching, I wish I had known that.
Yeah, well, I learned that lesson the hard way myself, because I started on violin, but I moved over to bass in 8th grade or 7th grade, and I essentially I play. I have no violinist left in me at all. But when I started teaching, I thought, I'll just demonstrate on bass, and then I realized, that's really a useless thing to try to do, because 90% of the kids in front of me play these little instruments, and I would be like, hold on. on, and I'd like go to the back and I'd say, turn around, everybody. And I'd like play something to be like 3 octaves lower than them. And it didn't make, and then I would try to keep the bass up by the podium and kids would be knocking into it. And unless I really set up the room the right way, that was not good. And then I realized, oh, violin is, of course you should be demoing on violin because you can move around the room. You can show everybody. You can. So do you, what do you demo on when you're playing?
Oh, I play violin all day, every day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you? Okay. So see, we have so much to talk about, Kate. So I decided when I went back to teach school, I decided to actually lock myself in the practice room like an hour a day and actually practice the violin. And I gave that up after I started teaching. And then when I got into better programs, I always had like a kid that was way better than me, and I would just say like, watch Agnes, you know.
Yeah.
And I would demo like for the freshmen or whatever, or show bow strokes. But did you consciously sit down to practice violin, or was it just like trial by fire as you were teaching?
Well, I had to play violin for that string program. That was one of the things that Dr. Wood was like, you know. And so, which was really good because I discovered my first year teaching that I didn't have a full grasp on the fingerings, the violin fingerings, and bass, like finger position names, like, in, you know, there's first position, half position, shift, and thumb, right? For bass players. That so they're like, is that in third position? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, those kinds of things. So I've had to fill in the gaps that I've found I've got. You know, and now like I play violin for a middle schooler. Okay.
Yeah.
You know,
you'd have to ask my former high school students about my violin skills. I would always love. We had an assistant director at my last program, and so I would oftentimes crash the first violin section with my violin. I remember playing Sleigh Ride, and at a certain point, I was like, I am just destroying Sleigh Ride with my bad intonation. Like I play very loud when I want to. I'm very confident in the right arm. My intonation is, I marvel at just how out of tune I can play for somebody that's played strings his entire life when it actually gets sophisticated, you know? Did you, I was so scared of violin fingerings and suggesting violin fingerings. I felt like I didn't. And at a certain point, I started to get a little more confident. I don't know why it was, but I finally like started to, I don't know. Did you have a moment when you started to just like get more comfortable with that?
Yeah, actually, and it was over vibrato because I couldn't get my fingers to do the thing. You know? So there's a kind of like a teacher institute, like right after school gets out. We always get out right before Memorial Day. So going into the first week of June, we have some classes you can take if you want. And so I signed up for some of the music classes, and one was upper strings. And I was like, look, y'all, I need to know how to play vibrato, and you got to make it happen. Help me out. And those teachers did. They helped me figure it out. And once I figured out how to do vibrato, like my world changed. Yeah.
It's funny because I was struggling with that when I came back. I don't think I ever learned how to do it when I was in 6th grade or whatever, or I was like the world's most slacker violinist. There's no such thing as a second violinist, but I was a second violinist. I was perpetually like 5th stand, second violin, you know, but really not. But yeah, it's funny. I don't know how the heck I unlocked it. I remember I was just sitting there banging my head against the wall in the practice room because it's just different from bass. It's not 100% different. You know, once you get it, it's almost like the same things relax in my body. But I am horrible at teaching violin vibrato. I am absolutely I'm actually pretty bad at teaching bass vibrato, frankly. I feel like, do you have any tricks or tips for, I guess, me or anybody listening? Like, could be for bass, could be for violin. Like, how do you teach that stuff?
Well, the biggest thing that I ever always do is I have to think about making everything wider. Always, Paul's hands are bigger than mine. So he would hold his hands out like this, be like, all right, here you go. There's my window. And I'd have to swing my hand in that window while playing vibrato, you know?
Yep.
So that's the thing that always made the biggest difference for me on bass. And with violin, it's about that flexibility and that tiny knuckle right there, you know, just being able to loosen it up so that the fingertip can wiggle inside there. Yeah.
When do you start to get into that with your students? Are you doing that in 6th grade, or does it depend on the student or the class? Like, how do you? Because I remember when I was teaching high school, I would the freshman class, a good percentage of them didn't really understand vibrato, and it was always tough because like I think most of them did, but not enough of them, and then pulling them out, it was always a challenge. Like, how do you introduce that? I think it's so interesting.
That's a good question. Somebody once said you can't teach vibrato until they can hear pitch, right? They can play in tune. So first thing is I have to make sure that they are kind of hearing the notes, and then posture is a huge thing, right? If the kid plays with the pizza wrist or their elbows down for cello, right, or bass, like those things have to get fixed first. Yeah. And then from there, usually the curiosity is starting to get sparked by that point. If they've got good posture, the reading's fine. They want to make the shaky thing happen, and then we start talking about it. And actually being able to loosen up, they're so stiff. The posture is such a stiff word, right? You're sitting good posture, right? But posture is actually a very flexible thing. So then you have to like tell kids, okay, you have to move your fingers on the fingerboard, right? And so then they're doing something that feels totally weird again. So it's just a process and getting them used to doing something weird, but we do just a lot of the sliding and having fun and the glissando sounds, because there's not going to be a lot that we can get done. But I've actually, this was a fun lesson. We performed Carnival of the Animals. Actually, there was the Anchorage Ballet did a performance, and then there was a symphony performance where our principal cellist, she performed the solo, and one of my girls got to go to the concert, the symphony concert, a cellist. And so of course she wanted the music as soon as she got back to school. So I got her the Swan, and I used that with her because lots of long notes, right? Lots of long notes. But I found Elvis's Can't Help Falling in Love. Right?
Oh, yeah.
I put that in. He said that all the kids can play it because they know it, right? And they want to play it. So you can teach vibrato on that song.
That's
lots of long
awesome.
notes. Yeah.
That's a good idea. I love that. I love that. Wow.
Lots of fun.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. What do you have? Who are some of your favorite composers? We're going way down the middle school orchestra rabbit hole, but I thought a lot about this, and I was the conductor for San Francisco All City Middle School Orchestra. Not last year, got canceled because of the pandemic, but the year before, so 2019. And it was really fun to pick out the rep and to think about, who are some of your favorite composers or arrangers? Some of your go-to people?
Brian Balmage's, right?
Oh, yeah.
His music is so beautiful. Just really, really gorgeous. And Richard Meyer is very smart about his music. Yes.
He has some sort of bass connection. I don't remember I don't think he plays bass, but somebody emailed me and I've tried to make a podcast happen with him. Maybe it will happen in the future. He's too busy writing awesome middle school titles probably. But yeah, Brian Balmage is, at the 2016 ASTA conference, I went, it was in Tampa, Florida, and I was still living in Chicago, and I totally blew off everything in that conference because I just wanted a vacation to Florida. So I actually showed up in flip-flops and shorts like a jerk. But I only went to 2 sessions. One was the keynote that I was really interested in the speaker, and then the other one was Brian Balmage's orchestration class, and it was so interesting. I'm such a fan of his music. Have you ever done lyric metal? So I know and sorry folks, listen, we're going way deep, but have you ever checked out lyric metal? Brian's title?
No, I haven't. Do you know what grade it is?
Yeah, it's a grade. I think it's like a grade 3.5 even or something like that. But it's not. Okay. It's not that tough. It's totally doable by like a decent 7th and 8th grade group. It's not more than a 3. It's probably a grade 3, actually, or it might even be a 2.5. I'd have to look back and see, but it's this sort of heavy metal-ish sort of thing, but also it's got this great, well, that's why the name is lyric metal. It's got these great melodic lines, and that was, I would always have disagreement when I pick something that excessively rhythmic. A lot of the times, half the orchestra would hate it and half of them would love it. That was one of those titles that everybody kind of got on board with. It has this sort of like quasi spooky, but really kind of cool, sonorous sort of texture. And yeah, I love his music. That's awesome.
Yeah, he did, and it's so silly and simple, but Beethoven Lullaby, and it's like, I think it's a 0.5, maybe.
Okay.
It's super simple, but you can use that song to teach a lot of things, like creating moments and, with your audience, the breath, right? Bow and tone, like those things. I mean, that's just huge. And I love that. I go to that piece very, very often.
Well, like the ability to create a good grade 0.5 or grade 1, and folks listening who don't like the 97% of people who don't know what Katie and I are talking about, educational music like intended for kids in school is graded on a system of 1 to 6. 6 would be like a professional symphony. It would be like Mendelssohn 4 or something. It's like professional literature. And then you go down like elementary school is usually playing grade 1. Middle school, a lot of the time you're playing grade 2, 2.5. I would even do 2.5 sometimes with my freshmen at high school. But the art of constructing something that's simple like that, but has some musical value it's incredible. Back 5 years ago, my high school group, we played the Midwest Clinic in Chicago, and one of the cool things about that is you have to play something that's grade 1, and you have to have at least half your program, I think, be grade 2 or 3. Also, so every publisher out there sends you all their latest scores. So I had this really cool experience of like going through probably like 50 grade 1 through 3 pieces, and there was some bad stuff in there, but there was one called "The Thing Under the Bed," which I really wanted to play just for the title. It's like the best title. Come on. The Thing Under the Bed did not make the cut, but although we had fun reading it, but it was really interesting finding some of those gems. There were some real gems. I'll have to go through my notes. I'll share I have them somewhere in Evernote. So.
Yes, I would love that. That's interesting that they were required to play a grade 1 and then the other pieces.
Yes.
How long were the performances?
They were an hour of 45 minutes of music, an hour total. And the reason why they require that is because the people going to that conference are mostly elementary, middle school teachers, some high school teachers, people with so many people that are looking for grade 1, 2, or 3 pieces. So what happens is you have all these groups. It's like the Super Bowl for orchestras and bands. So if you get in, it's the top groups that get in. So they can play anything. So what would happen if you didn't do that is all the music on the concerts there would be stuff that almost nobody could play because nobody has a group that good. So it's actually a really cool way. It's kind of a win-win for everybody. It's a chance to showcase these new pieces. Oh, and half your music has to have been published within the last 3 years, or maybe a third of it or something. So they're setting it up so that it makes it very complicated to program for this, because you can't play anything that any other group's doing. So everybody, it's like a lottery system, and everybody's competing with everybody for pieces and slots. Yeah, it was a fun process, but there was a lot to it. But it's cool because then if you go and see this conference, you're going to find pieces that your ensemble can play. And I found so many things that I ended up looking into, and many of which I ended up playing just from seeing groups playing grade 2 and 3 pieces. And it's a really interesting experience.
Yeah, that's really good. A lot of times those festivals, it can be a competition to see how hard a music you can play, and not a quality, and kids think that way very much too, and so reminding, having that required grade 1 could really showcase a group that might have reached out a little too far in some of their other selections.
Yeah. Well, it's such a good way to get inspired and find new titles. I'll tell you, it was so easy for me, and I only did it 7 years, but to kind of get beaten down by all the humdrum of the job, like ordering buses and doing my bloodborne pathogens test and, meetings after meetings after meetings and all that sort of stuff. And those events, I really, it was like a booster shot of inspiration. Anytime I would go to Midwest Clinic or the Illinois Music Educator Conference or ASTA or anything like that. And luckily, I was in districts that sent their teachers to those. Many schools and districts do not. And I was curious, like, what's string teaching like in the Anchorage area in general? Like, do most programs have string programs? Is it common, or is it like? I'd just be curious about your experience in terms of like how common it is in schools.
Sure. Anchorage School District, I guess, is actually a pretty large school district. I didn't think it was. Anchorage, Alaska is not big, population wise, but we have 8 high schools. Or nine high schools. Yeah. So all the schools that filter down. And that's the Anchorage municipality, which covers Girdwood. That's the half hour south all the way through Eagle River, half hour north. And so if you are an ASD school, you have band orchestra offered, typically, unless there's might be a couple specialties, but 6th grade through your senior year. Choir is offered as in elementary school, like a before or after school program. And then it's offered as a class starting in 7th grade. So there's choir, band, and orchestra offered in 6th through 12th grade here, which is really, really nice. Band teachers often get one building and only one band director. There's no assistants. And that doesn't matter the numbers, but that's okay.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting how different it is everywhere. That's good. And you said you're at 3 separate schools. Is that so? How does that schedule work? Are you and forget about COVID for a second?
Sure.
What? Yeah. What is that? What did that look like?
Normal. So I teach 4 traditional junior high school classes, 2 7th grade, 1 8th grade, 1 7-8 combo, and that's 5 days a week. Those 4 classes are 2 different schools, 5 days a week. Then I teach 2 6th grade classes 3 days a week, and one of those is at the 7-8 combo school. That's actually a K-8 school. And then the other school is a traditional elementary school, and that's just 3 days a week. So an easy day would be just 7th and 8th grade, no 6th grade. But most days consist of all three grades.
Wow. You have a full life, Katie.
Yes, I do.
and you're playing, and again, we forget about COVID for the moment. Your typical year, you're playing a lot more concert dates than I was, and I felt like I was overworked with the teaching full time. But one thing I did notice, I played in the Elgin Symphony. That's the longest thing I've done in my life. I think I was in it 16 years, and so all while I was teaching. And I noticed that when I was playing Elgin Symphony and I was practicing and that, I do think I was a better teacher when I was doing that than when I had a month of not playing. I don't know exactly why. I don't know if it necessarily directly affected my quality as a teacher, but I think just the fact that I was sitting on that stand and looking at a conductor and thinking about the music, it almost put me in my kids' shoes a little bit. I realized how close to middle school orchestra, professional orchestras are really. Everybody's kind of talking. Nobody's really paying attention to the conductor. You couldn't hear what the conductor said. Everybody forgot their pencil. And, it's all this stuff that would bug me as a teacher. It almost gave me a little more empathy for the experience my students were having. I think that was part of it. And I think also just holding a stringed instrument in my hand and making music, it got me a little more creative on the podium. Have you ever noticed a correlation there for you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. My grandmother was a piano teacher in town, and there's a band teacher who she was there when I started bass. She took piano lessons with my grandmother, and now she's the piccolo player in the symphony and retired from the school district. And she told me when I started, she said straight up, she was like, you need to feed your soul making music with adults, when you are away from teaching kids. And she was so right. Because I think you do forget the bigger picture. You do forget what to listen for if you get bogged down and thinking about low two, that second finger, can we get F natural, or can we actually listen to something blossom and experience, finesse with quality musicians. And it's just good. I just think you got to put some back in, because teaching is really putting a lot out.
Right. Well, and think about what you're able to bring to your students with that. I mean, you're in the big name groups in your town. You know, I mean, just the not that you need legitimacy behind your teaching, but I mean, there's that sort of street cred of actually doing that. Like I had so many colleagues, very good directors too, that the playing had basically evaporated for them, or they played here and there a little bit. And your career reminds me a lot of somebody who will probably listen to this podcast named Jeff Newman. I've had him on the show before. Jeff is an orchestra director in Las Vegas, and also plays. He would play like 100 nights a week too, playing on the Strip, all kinds of shows, and just like he could never imagine, and doing quite high level stuff too, like you're playing. And so I think it's just I can't imagine not doing that. And it was so interesting to talk to directors that or if they did play, it was like, oh, I play in a community group, and then I'm taking the next 2 years off, and I think it's an easy thing to just sort of let disappear from your life, because it's not especially if you have a full-time job and all that that becomes kind of the core of your career. I think it's really cool that you have been so active outside of the teaching job. So, and I'm sure that your students, even if they don't directly realize that what you're able to give to them as a result of that, I think is just so powerful.
Well, thank you. And actually, street credit matters. One of the things that I value about what I do is that I practice what I teach. Mm-hmm. That's definitely one of the things. But then also, I had a very, very smart young woman who was a killer basketball player. This girl, just competitive. Oh my God, she was amazing and smart cookie. And she gave me a run for my money. She, when I won my audition, she was like, "Oh, congrats. Wait, were you the only competitor? Did they have to pick you?" This little 8th grade girl, and she's right. So that street credit, it matters. Those kids, when they see you doing stuff, it makes a difference. If I show up to a sporting event, they're like, "Miss Eakes, what are you doing here?" I'm like, "Well, I can't run, but I can watch you," or whatever. Those kinds of things. So.
Wow.
Yeah. Playing still matters a lot to me. And it used to, and playing and teaching, it's this delicate balance that comes in waves. One will become stronger in my life than other ones. When I started teaching high school, I was teaching high school, I took that year off of opera, mm-hmm. because you just can't. I couldn't do it all, even if I wanted to. Yeah. But still playing is very, very important to me, and making music is important to me. It's who I am.
Katie, thank you so much. You rock. I love what you're doing. And it's interesting. Anchorage is extremely different from where I grew up, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, but the isolated nature of those two communities, there's definitely a lot in common. Certainly no mountains nearby where I grew up, and not on the water like that, but I can really relate to Katie and the work that she's doing and what it is like or must be like working in Alaska. And it's so interesting. I've had quite a few bassists on the podcast from Alaska now. Let me think. Jack Unziker's from Alaska. Paul Sharp I've had on the podcast, but as part of the Bad Boys of Bass. So he's from Alaska. Katie from Alaska. And, I think I'm blind. Oh, Richard Duke, of course. My friend here in San Francisco is from Fairbanks. I think you heard about all of them in this episode. So thank you, Katie. I had such a great time hanging out with you at the TMEA, Texas Music Educators Association, back in 2020. That seems like a lifetime ago, but I know those events will start up someday. All right. I have a diminishing amount of time to do these intros and outros. I'm looking at the clock, and I've got another interview coming up here. So I think I'm going to close out here and thank the team. Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, and Krista Copper helped me put these together. And Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, award-winning basses. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. I am your fast-talking, over-caffeinated host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.